All right, so we mentioned that there was this divergence that the Ecosocialist Green New Deal, which was Howie Hawkins' campaign platform in 2020, and then ultimately adopted by the Green Party in 2022. So it is officially part of the Green Party's platform now. That plan is very different from the various plans put forward by Democrats, which include the Green New Deal, but also Thrive and all these things around it. So we'll talk more about those details, but kind of an overview of some of the major differences are, for one thing, the Eco-Socialist Green New Deal is looking towards system change. Creating eco-socialism, moving away from capitalism as opposed to subsidizing capitalism, which is at the heart of all the democratic plans. We have a question of, are we going to put the economy more in public control, make it more democratic, under worker and community control, or are we going to subsidize capitalism and put all of these public funds into encouraging capitalist entities to go green, to kind of beg them, oh please, if we throw a bunch of money at you, will you kind of do the bare minimum a little bit, and then they keep all the profits for themselves, and then they own all the infrastructure, right? The capitalists, they aren't going to just do this. They're going to do it and say, well, I own it now, and you got to pay electric bills and rent and all, right? Instead of it being publicly owned. There's a public versus private focus. So the question is, who owns it? We touched on that a little bit. Is it publicly owned or is it privately owned? Renewable versus clean. This is a big one where Democrats like to throw in the term clean energy instead of renewable energy. And you got to be careful for that because it's meant to be deceptive. The way that they've defined clean can actually leave room for certain types of fossil fuel energy and nuclear energy. Whereas the Green Party's Green New Deal is 100% renewable energy, solar, wind, that sort of thing. It's not fossil fuels. It's bans fracking, in fact. Bans fracking, bans new fossil fuel infrastructure and all. As well as the Green Party's plan, phases out nuclear instead of investing more in it and building more nuclear, which is what Democrats would enable. There's also a big question of timetable. We know from science that climate change is accelerating, and we're really running out of time to be able to kind of limit some of the damage that's going to be from climate change. We're already there was just the report I saw earlier today about the ocean temperatures are the highest that they've been in human history, essentially. And there's lots of worrying signs like that climate change is really accelerating. We're really beginning to experience it with heat waves and crop failures and things like that. So we really have to accelerate our timetable in order to do this. And so the Green Party's Green New Deal is very clear that we could do this within a decade. We could do this, by about 2030. And we could still do this if we throw, all of our resources and energy into it. We could still do it. It's not impossible. But, we have to have the political will to do it. And the Democrats don't. They tend to define it as, well, maybe we'll get to it in 2050 or so. And so there's a huge timetable difference. There's also the question of economic Bill of Rights versus access. Democrats like that word, access. And this is essentially, are we going to guarantee human rights? Are we going to say that people absolutely, no questions asked, deserve housing and healthcare and education, all these things? Or is it going to be the typical Democrat strategy of like, well, it's nice if you have those stuff, and we'll maybe make a program where you got to jump through a bunch of hoops and file some forms, and maybe you'll get a little bit of financial aid if you're really, really in trouble. We'll means test it, we'll do all this stuff. Democrats mean it very differently when they talk about access. And finally, we have to acknowledge the military's role in all this. One of the biggest climate emitters in the world is the U.S. military. And so the Green Party's Green New Deal talks about cutting the military spending and all very significantly, so that we withdraw from being an imperial power. We don't want to do that for human rights issues, but also for climate issues. Having a giant military like that contributes significantly to climate change. And again, the Democratic Party doesn't really acknowledge that. And in fact, they've been voting with Republicans, all these past years about giving hundreds of billions of dollars more to the military every single year. So this is something they won't address.
And these are really, it's important, really important for people to understand that, the Green Party's vision of an eco-socialist Green New Deal is not just a gradation left of what the Democrats propose, right? we're calling for transformative change, right? We're calling for system change. We're fundamentally changing how our economy and how our whole society operates. And so, and this is true in a number of policies, right? That people tend to try to pigeonhole us as, oh, it's just, it's similar but a little bit to the left, and that's really not what it is. We're calling for fundamentally different things. Um, the idea of public ownership at the core versus subsidizing corporations, right? And when you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, right, which is Build Back Better, they didn't even pass, right? The progressives got played because when they were having that fight, the progressives said, no, we have to vote on both the Inflation Reduction Act and the social spending bill, which is what Build Back Better was supposed to be, at the same time. And they were told by party leadership, no, but if you support us on the Inflation Reduction Act, then we'll make sure that next one comes up to a vote. And it never even came up to a vote, right? Once they got the progressive, and that's the reality of progressive Democrats in the inside strategy. They're just getting played. They're not moving the needle left. They're making noise, but then towing the line. What the Inflation Reduction Act gave us was massive subsidies to corporations, massive subsidies to the middle class for things like electric vehicles, which is, that's a narrative that centers the solution to the climate crisis on you and me, on individuals, right? Even ignoring the fact that a subsidy for an electric car driver, a subsidy for an electric car is out of the reach for most of the working class. Even with the subsidy, we can't afford the electric vehicle. And the same thing goes for, things like residential solar panels and the subsidies that are given, by Democratic governments there, where that's great. But if you still have to put, $50, $100,000 or more up front to install the solar panels and then wait for a tax return, that excludes the entire working class. We can't afford that. The Democrats' plans on climate are almost universally subsidizing capitalism and paying bad actors to do better and paying the middle class to make slight shifts, in their behavior. And this, I'm from, like I said at the beginning, I'm from Illinois. We passed a law in, I believe, 2021 called CEJA. And CEJA is the local Illinois Democrats really tout it as the model for environmental legislation. Well, CEJA gives twice as much money bailing out the nuclear industry in Illinois than it does to renewables. That's where their focus is. Illinois has put billions of dollars into the nuclear industry in the last few years. But the National Democrats are the exact same way. Biden's plan is just like Obama's, is an all of the above plan, right? And that goes into the renewable versus clean. They like clean because it can include the myth of clean coal. They like clean because it can include natural gas, which they say is cleaner than coal, which is true, but it's still not clean. It's a fossil fuel, right? It can include nuclear because they say there's no emissions, but they ignore the damage done by actually harvesting the nuclear material, and then the fact that there's millions of tons of it, sitting around the world, around the country, and we don't have anywhere to put it. The clean allows you to rely on or to utilize carbon credits so that bad actors can just pay to have somehow on a spreadsheet their carbon emissions canceled off. So it's a really big thing. And when you get to timetable, the Democrats tend to couch it as pragmatic, right? It's the politically pragmatic thing, pace at which we can do this. Frankly, as a millennial, the pragmatic path was something we should have been doing decades ago. We're now in urgent transformation mode. We're in crisis mode. If we wanted to be pragmatic, the Democrats should have been acting on this decades ago, and they weren't. And the really important thing to understand about why this timetable is important is because every year, every day that we go not acting bakes more in, right? And so if we wait 10 years, it's not just that we have, to do more in a less amount of time. It's that those 10 years actually increase the amount of work we have to do to move things back, to get to where we need to be. And also because of inflation and things like that, that work will cost more, right? So it's really, really important that we do this, quickly. And it's really unfortunate that our politicalist leadership has led us to this point where a rapid transformation is all that's left, right? And that's where the next point of the idea of human rights and who is centered in this, right? Because if we have to move really, really fast, we have to make sure that it's not the working class that bears the brunt of this transformation. We have to make sure that there's a just transition for people in impacted industries and sectors. We have to make sure that the brunt of this falls on the people who caused the problem, right? Which is corporations, capitalism, not the workers. So it's really, really important that we don't let ourselves be, pigeonholed into this idea that we're really talking about the same thing, because we're talking about fundamentally different things. And we're going to talk about these a little more in the next slides, but we will have kind of a side by side where we can see some of these, how some of this plays out in policy.